Remlays. How are you doing? What's an Imperial light cruiser?
Hello, Fiaura. So yes, as she just stated, we're going to be taking a look at some Imperial cruisers. Firstly, the light cruiser. Now, these ships basically fall in size between cruiser and ex. These ships basically fall in size between cruiser and escort, mixing the firepower and durability of the former with the speed and maneuverability of the latter. It's a fairly common ship class, and they are very simple to construct, equally suited for reconnaissance patrols and for making a presence where their speed and maneuverability are an advantage, and where having a larger number of smaller hulls allows the Imperial Navy to monitor a wider area of space.
Just like he said, they're used for patrols and raids. You want a ship that can easily catch a small craft or a merchant ship modified for smuggling, but you want to make sure it packs enough firepower to look at said merchant ship and go, "No, you're surrendering or I'm going to make you explode." This is where the light cruiser comes into play. Yes, it only has one macro class battery on each side, but as illustrated in our methodology video, a macro cannon would cause extremely severe damage or outright destroy frigates and destroyers. It's more, and in real life, light cruisers are more to act as rapid response vessels as well as anti-fighter roles for larger ships in the fleet. This means while larger ships engage capital ships, light cruisers oftentimes prevent destroyers from closing to torpedo range, or in the case of 40K, torpedo and ramming range. But I believe that Remlays has some information on the most common light cruiser in the Imperial Navy.
Yes, which I believe is the Dauntless Light Cruiser. For any of you who've played Battlefleet Gothic, the first video game, you'll be all too familiar with this craft. Now, these craft have enough firepower to fight off a determined attack by escort-sized ships and can hold enough supplies to remain autonomous for months at a time. It forgoes the traditional armoured prow of the Imperial Navy, balancing the slack by being substantially faster and more manoeuvrable than a full-size Imperial cruiser. Though due to the need for saving power and to conserve supplies, the Dauntless has about half the shielding and turret cover of a full-size cruiser, but given its expected opposition, this is sufficient protection. Now, it has respectable weapons batteries on either side and an option of a full cruiser-class complement of torpedo tubes in the prow, as well as having a furious set of lances to set fire past the ship's prow and any enemy coming too close. So, huge amount of firepower for its size combined with high speed and maneuverability. It makes the Dauntless a ship not to be underestimated. It makes the Dauntless a ship not to be underestimated.
The Dauntless is supposed to be 4.5 kilometers long and 1.5 kilometers at its widest point, which is near the end where the sensors and engines are located. To give a reference for such a vessel, it's the length of the entirety of the walls of the city of Shanghai stretched out in one straight line, while it is the width of 137 highway lanes. It has a mass of 20 megatons, which is 20 million regular tons, which is the same amount of gold we can't get from the bottom of the ocean, estimated by scientists worldwide. This is a standard Imperial light cruiser. I do like that Games Workshop has shown max sustainable acceleration here rather than maximum speed, because in space, so long as you keep applying force to an object, you keep accelerating. There's nothing stopping you. So for a light cruiser, 3.9 to 4.3 gravity acceleration, I have some notes to give here. A Dauntless moves at 4.3 times gravity, which is 9.8 times 4.3. So it's going about close to 38 meters a second when it's accelerating. But the important thing to remember here is that it's having 843.8 billion newtons of force applied to it to move 20 million tons. at that speed.
Mm.
This is about 15% of the power that each macro weapon delivers upon impact. That means the vessel might be able to withstand the damage inflicted by a macro cannon battery. Again, I want to know what unobtainium these things are made of.
I would presume adamantium.
I wish I had orders of magnitude to give you so you would have some relational idea of just how much force this is, but simply put, we don't have weapons or any real-world comparisons when we're talking about destructive force that would literally end our world. An engine propelling something with this much force, in theory, could move the Earth out of its orbit by a couple 100 miles. Being armed with 4 torpedoes, which deliver each of them the same force as 3 Hiroshima bombs on target, as well as 1 macro cannon battery on each side, the vessel is what I believe to be the most basic of Imperial ships that would be placed on the front line. It's designed to be along that Imperial cathedral aesthetic as well, which you will notice the entire Imperial fleet looks almost exactly alike in that respect. So I guess it's easy to tell who to shoot at. Looking at macro cannons and assuming they fire a shell the size of a large building, I can ascertain that this thing has about 1.3 meters of metal armor plating at its thinnest point whenever I 3D model the vessel. I'm going to be entirely honest here, these feel like paper cannons. The sheer destructive force delivered by their guns and torpedoes, there's no amount of armor plating I would expect to be placed upon them that could resist it, much less armor plating than a battleship in real life. They're being hit with weapons that could crack planet crusts or result in the Yucatan impact zone. Such destruction begs me to question, do the engineers build these things to explode?
Probably.
But you can't mass produce the bigger vessels anymore, so I can understand why you're making a lot of smaller ones. I honestly wish I had some chemical composition of the armor, and so I could do some little metallurgy examinations to determine exactly what the armor can withstand. But that also means the macro cannon shell hitting the armor is thicker than the armor. While the armor prow is angled excellently for a frontal assault or for ramming, it is terrible at protecting the rest of the ship as soon as they turn to broadside. The broadsides are completely flat. They are unangled. It's pretty easy to see that the armor plating is not being put to its full potential using any form of rounding or sloped armor. The bridge and engines are incredibly exposed. That giant cathedral on top screams, "Shoot me, you'll kill the captain." The engines on the back literally have no armor around them. It's just engines slapped onto a hull.
And of course, void shields, which we are not taking into account.
Yes. This assumes that the battle has gone on for more than one volley and the void shields are down. If you turn 90 degrees, you're just going to aim for the engines or the bridge or the guns. All of these things are incredibly exposed and look mostly unarmored. I wonder if other races have some critical points that actually have protection on them for their core power supply, their weapons, their engines. Does the entire ship have to be exposed to deliver these massive guns back and forth? It's a thing I question about the entire Imperial Navy, especially when I see Tyranid and Necron and Tau and Orc and Eldar vessels. But that's another video. What's the next ship we have?
Next up is the Endeavour-class light cruiser. Now, it's slower than the Dauntless, and therefore it's unsuitable for acting in an anti-piracy role, but it's more used as a convoy flagship or a heavy escort for a large capital ship. So, to counter the vulnerability of being as slow as a larger capital ship, the Endeavour has a much better turret array than a Dauntless. However, the power to upgrade the shields to the same level cannot be found. So, it's not going to have the same amount of protection as a capital, obviously. But this class does have two variants, which are the Endurance and the Defiant, which I think we might be covering later. But the Endeavour has large weapons batteries, so it can hold its own in the fleet engagement. Basically, its firepower is almost equaling that to a full-size cruiser, though their batteries are only relatively short range.
Well,
rather than an actual threat.
Well, I can say that they did fix my biggest armor complaint here because they just turned an entire section of the ship into armor plating and removed the giant cathedral that screams, "Shoot me." This would appear to be a modification to the Dauntless class cruisers, but lore-wise, it's the exact opposite. The Dauntless is a modification of the Endeavor, which means that the Imperium went for armor and protection and then decided that was too much. I imagine this cruiser was probably made before encountering Eldar Corsairs, and the Dauntless was made in response by taking off armor to give it faster speed. Both of them still employ the basic broadside tactic of turn broadside, fire as many shots into the air as you possibly can, and hope that something hits. I actually want to see a macro cannon strike this ship. Not because I want, hundreds of Imperial lives to be wasted, but rather I want to see what happens to the ship's course and trajectory when it gets hit by one of these things. And I want to see how the armor actually reacts. I imagine every time you hit the hull and the ship doesn't explode instantly, there's like a huge just sideways movement as the impact of the round pushes the ship several hundred feet, and the entire crew is thrown to one side of the vessel and screaming, "I hate inertia."
So basically like kicking a beer can. An empty beer can.
Kicking a beer can with people inside.
That's a big beer can.
It's safe to say, though, the biggest difference between the Endeavor and the Dauntless is just the armor plating. They still pack torpedoes, they still have their ramming prow, they still have their guns, they still have their engines. The Endeavor's just slower, and they decided to make it actually protected. Rem, if this keeps up, I'm going to be impressed.
So I think it's time to take a look at the variations of the Endeavor. So let's take a quick look at the Endurance. So the Endurance has short-range lance weaponry and short-range weapons battery and 2 torpedo tubes. Again, like the Endeavor, it's short-range. But the main difference is that the Endeavor's main weapon batteries have been replaced with a lance deck. So this is actually used in conjunction with the Endeavor, so they kind of cover each other's mutual weaknesses to kind of compensate for one another.
Okay. So for a start, you would think that lance batteries would just be really big laser guns. But they're not. In Warhammer 40k, ship-based lance batteries are mostly just clusters of large-sized las cannons. They're larger than the las cannons Space Marines carry, but they're not exactly one gun. You would also believe that these would be long-range weapons that would have considerable accuracy. Accurate, yes, especially compared to the mass firing of macro cannons. Long range? Not really. Their range is dependent on the power that's injected into them, apparently. Looking back at our Imperial Guard episode of Men at Arms, where we discuss the las cannon, I'm able to calculate mostly what these are capable of doing to a ship. In comparison to a macro round, they're kind of pea shooters. but I could also see them being used to great effect to disrupt energy fields such as Void Shields or the Eldar's Hollow Fields when they encounter a foe by simply matching the frequency and causing the shield to be repulsed away from the laser, causing you to have to expend a lot more power to stop the laser. I know also that because it's a laser, it's traveling at the speed of light, meaning it is a point-and-click interface for space. It doesn't matter that it's 1,000,000 kilometers away if all I have to do is point and click, and there's no chance of it dodging. So, unlike macro cannons that are inaccurate and you're just hoping to get a hit, I feel lance cannons would be used more like sniper weapons, and you would literally go, there's the bridge, and you would adjust it by 0.00001 degrees from that range in order to get the cannon exactly on target to the part of the ship you want to blow apart.
There is the bridge. There was the bridge.
Huh.
In theory, at least.
I wonder what barbecue captain tastes like.
Well, if it's like Admiral Akbar, it tastes like fish, wouldn't it?
I'm going to defy you on that one and expect you to talk about the next ship.
Okay, so we're going to take a look at another variant on the Endeavour-class cruiser, the Defiant. Now, the main difference with this one is that its weapons batteries are replaced with attack craft flight decks.
So, go ahead.
I was going to say, so that's basically the only main difference between these classes.
The Defiant had to have its length and width actually increase in comparison to the other ship classes to give room for the fighters. Small craft are harder to maintain and provide support for compared to traditional guns or missiles. You don't just need ammo, you need fuel, replacement parts, and crews. A small craft requiring crew, fuel, and space to land means that you have to have a bigger area for the weapons for a launch bay. This is further complicated by additional pieces needed for ground crews and command and control dockside, where ships are coming and going constantly during combat. This explains why she is actually larger than the Endeavour and Endurance class cruisers and less used. Small craft do have a couple of advantages though, and this is using carrier style tactics rather than broadsides or spinal weapons. They give the advantage to be able to overwhelm the enemy forces with numbers at close range. Against other light cruisers, it doesn't mean you have to rely on gunnery skills or force of will to get in close to do your damage, but rather you can sit off in the asteroid field or a nebula, hiding, easily able to defend yourself well outside the range of the enemy guns, and send fighters and small craft out to do the work for you. This makes an excellent possible flagship for a light cruiser only fleet, in that the Dauntless and Endeavour and Endurance can close in and do their thing, while the Defiant sits back and commands the battle while launching fighters, thereby applying its own firepower to the battle from a relative point of safety for the admiral who needs to be making the strategic commands for the rest of the fleet. Oh, and there's a reason why I would suspect these survive more than the other ships, because when the battle goes south, they can just turn and run. Other ships that are up at the front line that are point blank in terms of a space fight, or in actual terms, really actually point blank because they just ram something, don't have that luxury. So what do you got for us now, Remlays?
Right, so next up is one we actually don't have too much information about. It's called the Defender class. Now, it's a very popular one to use as a convoy flagship, and they're very ideal for fighting off pirates and orcish raiders attempting to capture merchant fleets. Now, again, while we don't have too much data about them, there has been stories of how one particular ship was able to fight off 17 ships and 204 attack craft pretty much solo.
Did they come at it one at a time?
No idea. Either that or it's an incredibly skilled crew.
Um, but you are correct. We don't have a lot of data or pictures of this vessel at all, and it doesn't appear to have any significant differences except for it just has the extra point defense turret um, near the tower, which is a towering cathedral of please shoot here. I do question why it isn't located behind the cathedral to defend the exposed engines. You have to remember, they're using broadside tactics, and having nothing actually defending the engines or in that area means that if you get behind it, there's a 90-degree arc that is completely lacking any weapons that can point at you and deal with you, and leaves the engines very vulnerable to just, shoving around up the old tailpipe.
Ooh, sorry.
Well, now that we've gotten over our dose of surprise, what's the next vessel on the list?
Right, next up is the Enforcer class. Now, the Enforcer is used as a system enforcer or system protector. Basically, it uses a combination of attack craft squadrons and lance weaponry to intimidate planetary populations and governors into remaining in line with the Imperium. This also means that the ship is effective against pirates and rebellious fleets, but less successful in large ship-to-ship engagements.
This is really I need attack craft and all we can manage is a light cruiser. Think of it as a support vessel for the main line, staying back and launching attack craft, and it is literally the smallest vessel available for this role. I honestly don't understand why the Imperium doesn't produce tons of these vessels. The United States did this with escort carriers during World War II over the cost and difficulty of making fleet carriers, battle cruisers, and battleships. If you can outnumber the enemy in 40k, you often win. The fact is also, losing an Enforcer-class cruiser would barely put a dent in Imperial forces, whereas losing those expensive and irreplaceable Emperor-class battleships seems to be silly, especially since a lot of them that I read about are lost using suicide tactics.
Yeah.
That's something for part 2 of this. This is actually a really good vessel to pair with a Dauntless-class cruiser. The Endeavor is capable of providing fighter cover, anti-torpedo defense, and bomber strike at foes, while the Dauntless does its job to create a battle line or at least close with the enemy, while supported by the small craft of the Endeavor. They can also take on command roles since they don't have to get in close to deal their damage, and larger ships may be unavailable. I could easily see you using a couple of these to defend planets that are particularly far out from the Imperium, or that the Crusades happen to come across a planet that are defended by light cruisers. You would expect one of these to probably be the flagship. Just as the Dauntless has armor, speed, and size, the biggest difference here is the additional crew. These crew are likely to be very cramped on a vessel of this size. This may influence crew morale, which the Imperium is not known to really care about, but as proven by Sun Tzu and Genghis Khan, morale can easily influence a battle. Factors like cramped quarters, uncaring officers, or crew or individuals not having had breakfast before the battle starts can often lead to winning battles, but also massive attrition, or individuals not performing at peak performance during the battle itself. We also have to remember that the Imperium views their crews as replaceable, whereas we today value experience since it's something that we can't replace in the heat of combat through training or equipment. The Imperium often seems to forget just what experience can mean in a battle. I expect the durability and maneuverability to be about the same as a Dauntless due to it being the same hull. Other than this, the Endeavor is just a proven refit for command and small craft duties. And it fulfills roles that would normally be fulfilled by a cruiser or a battle cruiser when those are not available. I hear there's more of these light cruiser things they like throwing around.
Yes. Next up is the Siluria class, which is also quite possibly the ugliest looking ship I have seen today.
I know, right?
It looks like someone just melted something on the stove.
It looks like someone was trying to make a sword and it was still hot and they dropped it and let it hit every branch of the ugly tree on the way down.
I was going to say it looks like some child's first doodle in crayon, trying to draw a castle. But anyway, these ships are basically best suited as supporting craft, sporting rows of weapons batteries over lance armaments. They can still cause significant damage with a broadside, but they're generally It's and ugly. So I don't know why they're still in service. Just get rid of the fuckers.
This is truly what I would expect if this was my first battleship by the Imperium. Considering the utter lack of anything special, it has no ramming prow, no torpedoes, no heavy weapon turrets, just macro cannons. This is truly the cheapest of the cheap ships. Like, it's literally as though you went, it's got guns, it's good enough, and called it a day. Considering the Imperium has developed no new weapon systems for 10,000 plus years, I truly question if this is supposed to be a real combat ship or just a prototype that's been pushed into service by necessity. Then I'm reminded that there are literally thousands of these things in fleet service. I have so many questions about this ship, its origins, the possible refits they could have put on it, everything, but all I can analyze is a ship that is just not something that should be used by any navy.
And whoever came up with its schematics was obviously blind.
Obviously blind or a tech priest.
Oh, come on, the other ships aren't too bad. And they're designed by tech priests. Well, some of them were, at least.
The all macro cannon battery design is literally proven later in the next video to be a terrible idea. I mean, if you want to pull up and exchange broadsides with people, wonderful. That's also how you get your own ship blown up. But it lacks any support systems, secondary weapons, actual defensive turrets. A fighter can destroy this entire ship because it has no point defense weapons. I agree with the lore of this vessel. It's good for one thing, taking torpedoes from enemy vessels. At least one. I imagine the first torpedo just kind of breaks it in half, and then you're like, whew, glad I dodged that torpedo volley, realizing that you just cost the lives of 50,000 Imperial citizens.
Oops.
Please tell me.
That's only the Imperium, they'll get them back.
Do we get to bigger vessels now?
Yes, now we're moving on to cruisers, which are, as the name implies, bigger than light cruisers. Who would have thought? So cruisers are the ships you'll see the most commonly in the fleet to make up the numbers. Not as powerful as a battleship, but much faster and can still deliver a deadly blow. Now, the crew compartment of these ships can be anywhere between 1,000 to 100,000 people, which is, whichever way you slice it, a large number of people on board a ship. They tend to sport the same generalized hull design, but incorporating different combinations of broadside batteries, lance turrets, and starfighter hangars. So, let's start this off by taking a look at the Lunar class. Now, the Lunar class is pretty much a jack-of-all-trades type ship, having reasonable lance and weaponry battery armaments, and a fair torpedo capability. For what it lacks in speciality, it makes up for in versatility, making it the Imperial warship of choice.
Well, if you're going to have a warship of choice, having the ability to have virtually preparation for any combat situation is a good idea. These are equipped with most every weapon the Imperium has. It has macro cannons, lance weapons, torpedoes, and a ramming prow. I still don't understand the Imperium's need to ram things. It's almost like they're copying somebody.
Who would have thought?
Therefore, the ship is equipped for all situations without any particular specialization. To carry so much weaponry, it's not even significantly larger or heavier than a light cruiser. It's 5 kilometers long and 0.8 kilometers wide. The increased width is where it gains most of its extra mass, I would assume, which, with all the extra chunks of weapon batteries it wants to add, it needs to have room for the lance battery. The vessel is clearly designed to act as a multi-purpose ship and the fleet mainstay, hence why hundreds of them are constructed. There's nothing else remarkable. It has the same flaws as the light cruisers. Armor weak points, huge exposed bridge, exposed engine, and lack of defenses underneath the vessel. There isn't a whole lot to say about this one. The issue I have with Imperial crews is crew size and lack of automation altogether. There's 95,000 of them. That's a large city acting as a crew of just one ship. And if you want spite purposes, you have to train them all. Ugh.
Well, put it this way, those who fail in their training will be made into servants.
It's almost like the Imperium's a bunch of tyrants.
No, surely not.
Don't they have a ship called a tyrant?
Funnily enough, they do. It's almost like it's a segue. So, the Tyrant class is, well, effectively the longer range version of the Lunar, even though it's not strictly a variant, featuring long-range plasma-based weaponry, but the Adeptus Mechanicus found out that this long-range weaponry was actually kind of crap. It was no threat to anything bigger than an escort at long range, though it still has short-range weapons batteries and torpedoes to cripple a cruiser if it's at full volume. It also has enough torpedoes to cripple a cruiser if at full-strength volley were to hit, though it has no lances.
Please note that a plasma macro cannon has the same physics as a regular ballistic macro cannon hurling ballistic shells. They just hurl plasma instead, and therefore it has less to worry about for ammunition storage because you only need a small amount of plasma to begin to generate enough plasma to hurl outside, and you can even possibly generate it from a reactor instead of having to carry it around. The Tyrant class cruiser is capable of delivering massive broadside and in principle works on just broadsiding the sheer number of shots. Other than this, it's the exact same hull as a Lunar-class cruiser. It just needs more people. It has the same engines, design, weaknesses, and overall capabilities, save for the lack of lance weapons as opposed to I'm going to pull up and press the big red button and hope that I dominate this situation. Hey, Remlays.
Yes, speaking of dominate. Next up, the Dominator class. Now, this was designed originally to act as a long-range vessel, using a massive Nova cannon to fire from behind the fleet battle lines. Though, it never really excelled in this role and only gained a handful of victories to its name. So, unfortunately, it was never appreciated. Altogether now, But the flanking weapon batteries are as powerful as those on a Retribution-class battleship, but they do not share the range of the larger ship's guns.
Huh. So, Nova Cannon. If we have macro cannons, Nova Cannons are the next logical step. Macro cannons are already traveling at 2% the speed of light. What's the difference in 2% and 50%?
Quite a bit.
These weapons are described as sending a projectile, or for that matter, any object, at the fastest speed the Imperium has ever achieved in real space. This is why they're so destructive. If an object is traveling at that speed, its relative destructive force is going to be obscene. If an explosion happens at that speed, then the explosion continues to travel at that speed. This is why when these explode, they have an area of effect of roughly 29,000 kilometers. It's like artillery, but in space. Putting one on a ship takes it from a planet-killing vessel to an outright planet-cracking vessel. There is nothing that could withstand the destructive force of this. It is traveling at such a speed that I have to calculate the electron speed at which it will peel apart whatever it hits. Note I said electron. I'm not calculating the speed at which you die. That's instantaneous. I'm calculating the speed of the electrons that are left over from your body and where they're hurled after you're hit with this thing. That means it's traveling so fast that individual molecules are impacting into you in such a way that they warp reality and tear you apart, electron by electron. Have you ever wondered what would happen if you stood in a mass accelerator when it was going?
End up like Dr. Manhattan from Watchmen.
Therefore, all this happens faster than the blink of an eye. Remember how people died from Thanos' snap? That's what happens to you, except at the speed of light.
Mr. Admiral, sir, I don't feel so good.
Exactly!
The meme had to be said somehow.
Other than this, the Dominator class has the same macro batteries, the same lance weaponry as most other ships of its class. I believe this is because of the power needed to sustain the mounts. They've elected to go with only lance turrets and keep nothing else but macro batteries installed in the ship, because the Nova cannon is probably drawing half of the ship's core to be used. It doesn't have torpedoes, it doesn't have a lance prow weapon, it doesn't have anything like that. It relies on this big, massive gun that I'm surprised doesn't bring the ship to a complete halt or hurl it 10,000 kilometers backwards when it fires the thing. I have no way of actually calculating the precise numbers of a Nova cannon. There's nothing in our scientific algorithm that comes close to being able to express this type of weapon. When I say that, I mean that. I would be looking at telling you numbers in degrees of infinity for how much force this would apply when it hits something. If macro cannons are planet crackers, a Nova cannon is a planet raker. Well, that was depressing.
Yes. Speaking of depressing, the Gothic class cruiser. So this cruiser is used in a battlefield role. Is battlefield the right type? Let's use that anyway. It's used in the similar battlefield role to that of an Apocalypse-class battleship, in that it's designed to use its lances to directly damage a ship rather than cut through its shields. So as such, is normally paired with the more commonly seen Lunar-class cruiser, which is the only class of cruiser that's actually more commonly seen than the Gothic. Now, if this ship is caught alone, it's generally considered to be more vulnerable than any other cruiser in the Navy, because while its lancers are incredibly powerful, they are slow and cannot deal damage fast enough to force an attacker to withdraw.
I have to completely contradict lore now. Lance battery weapons fire at the speed of light. If you are in range to engage your target if you can pick up your target on sensors, you're in range to engage. This is a pure point-and-click interface to get rid of them. There's no dodging a laser unless you're dodging the aim of the person pointing it at you. The weapons the Gothic class are equipped with are sniper designed to blast pale dots well outside of anything you can view. You might not even be able to see the target with a telescope. This is the closest thing the Imperium has to a spinal weapon style design of ship. Yes, I know the Nova Cannon does act as a spinal weapon, but this is the closest thing they have that the entire ship is designed around these weapons that are firing from so far beyond the realm of projectile and visual range that they should be able to precisely pinpoint a target and shoot individual systems off of it from 1,000,000 or more kilometers. I'm surprised this isn't the mainstay Imperial weapon against Eldar or Tau warships, where Eldar move incredibly quickly and Tau rely on railguns. Imagine being able to sit at ranges well beyond their engagement capabilities, firing weapons they can't dodge. Simply put, the Gothic is a direct counter to anything that is high speed or incredibly evasive. Hey, Tech Priest.
Yes.
I believe that's your cue to dictate the next insanity.
Sorry, I think you actually cut out there. That's why I didn't say anything.
That's fair. That's fair. I'll get somebody to start rights on my communication device.
Okay. So next up is the Dictator class, which is in itself a rebuilt Lunar class cruiser, though the Lance decks have been rebuilt into flight decks for attack craft, but it still retains the Lunar class's weapons batteries and torpedo capabilities.
It's said that this vessel is favored as a flagship for long-range patrols or heavy combat because fighters. I can't imagine why being able to stay outside the enemy sensor range and launch small craft that are being helped direct by your picket ships is a wonderful thing. Think of this as acting more like the Tiger's Claw from Wing Commander, using other cruisers to act as their close-in support ships as well as their scout ships, while they sit back and just hurl waves of aircraft at the enemy to deliver precision attacks against their ships while they're in the middle of trying to brawl with, say, an Endeavor or a Dauntless class. As described with the smaller Endurance class, the small craft, due to the nature of weapons in 40K, make a lot of sense. The ships have plenty of time to maneuver when shots are coming at them. 18 seconds is a heck of a time when you're talking about vessels moving kilometers in that time to avoid incoming shots and torpedoes. Fighters and bombers are literally able to deliver their firepower within a second once they're in range. And you can't dodge something that's more maneuverable than you. As well as using assault gunships to knock out turret fire or drop plasma bombs or even deliver boarding troops. Hey, you know what the really good tactic in space is? Let me make your ship my ship. If you really want that enemy Nova Cannon taken out, or you want that pesky admiral who's barking orders to stop, a dictator with a load of bombers seems to be the way to do it. And I believe that we only have one or two more before we're going to have to cut this one.
Yes. So shall we jump in to explaining the concept behind battle cruisers?
You mean that concept that utterly failed in real life? Let's talk about it.
Yes. So, a battle cruiser. What makes a battle cruiser? Well, it's simple. You take a regular cruiser, give it more weapons, make it larger, and give it advanced power distribution systems. There you go, battle cruiser. Simple in theory, isn't it? So let's start us off by taking a look at the Armageddon class battle cruiser. And I wonder if anyone's going to be leaving comments below with the StarCraft quote, battle cruiser operational. But anyway, So the Armageddon class has a similar weapons layout to the Lunar class cruiser with medium-sized weapon batteries, 2 lance positions on each flank, and torpedoes, but due to the increased power availability, it has far greater range than their counterparts.
So, you remember the hood, right? Or
The hood, as in like Leprechaun in the hood.
no, I mean like the one that exploded. This falls into the broadside class as lunar class cruisers. It's a lunar class cruiser with significantly more crew and additional lance batteries. Sure, I'm in! Wait, no additional armor? You didn't increase the size of the engines? You gave it no additional defenses other than just more guns to fire at big ships? You didn't even give it more point defense turrets?
Yes, it seems like a bit of an oversight.
So let me get this straight. Hold the phone here. This is the burned out shell of a lunar class cruiser that wasn't capable of protecting its crew or completing its mission and returning to base. We had to haul it back. And the way we solved its shortcomings was to put more guns on it? Are we sure an orc didn't design this?
It was Admiral Tacticus. This ship needs more Dakar. That'll make it better. And paint it red for good measure, son.
I have questions I don't want answers to. This has all of the drawbacks and advantages of a lunar class cruiser, just with extra weapons, sacrificing speed, crew comfort, requiring additional crew to be trained for it, and sacrificing the ability to operate on long-term exploration or extreme range patrol duties. They appear to have gone full orc with redesigning and rebuilding these ships. And I honestly say I can't blame them. The orcs appear to be pretty good at just adding more guns, and that works for them, right?
Well, yeah.
I'll ask and work. But for now, this is just an upgunned lunar class cruiser. And you still have the issues that were before, a lack of armor, and now you're adding on a lack of speed and maneuverability. It might work as a good flagship if there's no other alternative, but as a mainstay of your fleet, you may want to reconsider this one. Do the tech priests on Mars have a better idea?
Let's find out. Next up is the Mars-class battle cruiser, which features the classic armored prow, allowing it to close in with the enemy in relative safety, though it features long-range weapon batteries, 2 lances, and a fearsome Nova cannon, but it also supports a large number of attack craft, so it serves as a small fleet carrier and long-range patrol ship, and while it's adequate in both roles, it doesn't really excel in either way.
Okay, so the Japanese tried this concept with the Fuso, the battleship carrier. Wasn't really effective because it doesn't work. It doesn't excel at either role, so there's always a ship that's better at that individual role. The use of a Nova cannon along with fighters, bombers, and lances, however, is designed to clearly keep this ship as far away from the main battle line as possible. It's like the tech priests on Mars looked up and went, battle cruiser. No extra armor? This needs to not get near the front line. As described in the records of the Imperial Navy and the lore of video games, Nova cannons are also useless at close ranges, and fighter bays are incredible vulnerability points. Just imagine for a moment if you hurl a macro cannon round into the fighter bay while it's open.
Whoops.
So I think the tech priests of Mars have gone out of their way to really emphasize stay away from the enemy when using this ship. In
Yeah.
any close-in encounter, this ship is going to consistently prove that it only has its weapons batteries for defense when it's at that range while it's refueling its bombers. I can see why this is very popular in the Imperium among rogue traders. I can inflict a whole lot of damage and not lose any profits because my ship didn't take any damage. They also don't have to put their lives at risk when they want to fight back against raiders, or if they just want to tell the Imperial Patrol, you're not searching my vessel. This one really does fall into the classification of a combination of the spinal weapon with the Nova Cannon and the carrier role with the fighters. And considering the Nova Cannon can't be removed without tearing the ship apart, you're stuck being a long-range support craft.
So, next up, I do believe, is the Overlord class. Now, while this is considered to be a relatively popular ship with Navy captains and admirals, it is considered to be a poor man's Retribution class battleship. It has the torpedo tubes replacing the prow-facing weapons batteries, though this in fact does create a surplus of power which is used to boost the range of the Overlord's dorsal lance array. In fact, it's boosted to a level that's usually only seen on battleships.
So for a start, this is the second fastest battlecruiser. It's only 0.1 gravities faster than the third, but please note that's nearly a meter per second, which translates to around 3.52 kilometers per hour faster than the other ships. This means that this Imperial battlecruiser has a little bit more maneuverability, adding to the fact that its dorsal lance batteries can reach out and touch you in naughty places. This means it can avoid a lot of fire. It can use those dorsal lance batteries to look over and go, "You, escort class ship, stop existing." And when choosing to fire at it, it's going to be able to speed up or slow down faster than most other battlecruisers in the Imperial Navy. The Overlord fits the classification. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Let's go do some broadsiding. It has rows of macro cannons ready for mass shot firing when it gets in close against cruiser and larger class vessels. It's made to close in, and it's centered around those cannons. The extra speed, the extra prow armor, the torpedoes, all of it is just made to get close and broadside. It still has a distinctive lack of undermounted weaponry, but that's just going to be common with all the Imperial ships. I suppose the crew should get used to doing a roll and firing from upside down, but then again, gravity is relative on one of these things.
Indeed.
And this is an excellent example of how the Imperial Navy have designed the majority of their ships. All lore says long range, but so often these batteries are fired in mass volley and a lot of them miss. It's depicted in novels and video games that the ships have a lot of destructive firepower once they get within 10,000 kilometers, which for space purposes is point blank.
Yeah.
And it's clearly designed to act as that point blank symbol for the smaller vessels of Imperial might and power. An Overlord class battlecruiser operating in a battle line is likely a point of reference contact for individual tactics among cruiser squadrons. So while you have the Admiral ship sitting as far away from the fighting as possible to keep the Admiral safe while he directs the entire fleet, the individual Overlord class battle cruisers are likely the ones telling, "Hey, you two lunar cruisers and you Gothic, yeah, shoot that guy, all of you at once." And likely Imperial battle lines are made or broken based on how well Overlord class battle cruisers do. What's the fastest battle cruiser and the last ship we have for this video?
I do believe it is the Chalice class, which was meant to be a fast, heavy cruiser using a combination of light armor and powerful weaponry, but due to its weak armor and the tendency for its plasma coils to rupture, it's proved to be a very unsuccessful design and is currently only used by the fleet in the Calixus sector. They should have really called it the Poisoned Chalice.
I thought we proved that this concept didn't work back in the days of dreadnoughts and the Battle of Jutland. Give a larger than a cruiser, smaller than a battleship levels of firepower with light armor and all the speed. Does it work in the vastness of space? Well, this is certainly the fastest cruiser-class Imperial vessel in existence. It won't
and it'll probably fall apart if you look at it funny.
Yep. It won't outrun a light cruiser, but at 3.4 gravities, it's moving at roughly 120 kilometers an hour, or 119.95 kilometers an hour acceleration. This is 2 kilometers a minute. Considering things take 18 seconds to get from my gun to target, that is a lot of estimation for where this target could potentially be by the time your shell arrives. Imagine for a moment trying to take in your target's current speed, knowing it can shift in any direction from where you estimate it to be by 800 meters by the time your shell gets there. It must be really annoying to be a gunnery officer. Okay, it's going to be here and anything in this circle, so cover the whole circle. That means a lot of shells are likely missing these from broadsides. But if you just adopt a saturation target, you don't need to hit it with a lot of shells. You only need to really hit it with one. Because the Chalice has the same problem the Hood, Invincible, Indefatigable, and Queen Mary had. They rely on speed and light armor. But in a mass fleet engagement where rounds are flying everywhere and commanders are often coordinating tons of fire onto the same target, a battle cruiser poses a big target. And in the case of Imperial propaganda, the Chalice is some sort of symbol of the fleet. This is an excellent vessel to target for morale purposes, considering they have a problem of a lack of armor. I literally 3D modeled this. It has less armor than a Dauntless.
Which is not really something you want on something that's supposed to be, a battle cruiser.
While it doesn't pose a ton of threats since they don't have the extra turrets, Nova Cannons, fighters, or anything else utterly horrific that they could unleash besides their guns, they have the same guns you'd find on a regular heavy cruiser. It doesn't have the battleship levels of firepower of the poor man's retribution, i.e. the Overlord. This is by all means a bad ship. It seems like the Imperium of Man needs to rediscover the 20th century in order to read up on how to not design battle cruisers that don't work. But we are splitting this video into two halves, because at this point, we've been recording this first half for an hour.
Yes. So, join us in part 2, where we continue carrying... Yeah. So join us in part 2, where we will continue covering Imperial Navy ships. The link should be in the video description below, and I'm sure Fiaura will put it on the channel screen for you as well.
Totally gonna do that. Because we still have a few more battle cruisers to get to before we get to grand cruisers and the thing you've all been waiting for, battleships.
So we'll see you in part 2.
Yes, we will, and we'll find out if I sink Remlace's battleship.
Ha ha ha.